Hi, I'm Ken Collins of Bad Shoe Productions. Welcome back to my part 2 on installing a centrifugal supercharger on a 96-97 Thunderbird. Now, in my first video, I showed and talked about things that I have done to this car to get it prepared to take the supercharger. There was a couple things that I forgot to mention. One is I have already upgraded the fuel system. Early on in this project, I put a 255 liter per hour fuel pump in. And even if you weren't going to go supercharged, but you're going to go high performance, I would suggest you upgrade your fuel pump right off the bat. One of the first things you should do. After all, the stock fuel pump in Fords, you have to understand that when they set the car up, they're going to use the minimum spec needed to operate that car, with that stock setup. It's going to be cheaper, it'll probably last a little longer, it'll be a little bit quieter, but certainly in a performance application, you want to go to a much higher volume fuel pump. Another thing is that I have upgraded this to a high performance or, a high PO, replacement exhaust system or catback system, I guess you'd say. It looks just like a stock exhaust system, does have bigger pipes. And from the exhaust note, I know that it has low restriction mufflers, I guess what we used to call turbo mufflers. It was a Walker unit. I'm not even sure if it's still available, but it is on this car. One other thing that I've done, this will help with tuning. I have relocated the ACT, the air charge temperature sensor. You have to remember, if you had old Fox bodied 5 liter, the ACT sensor is in the intake manifold. Well, on these, it's mounted in the air filter. That's fine, but when you go to supercharge, you know that the compressed air coming out of the supercharger going into your intake is going to be a much higher temperature. So therefore, I want to know what that temperature is. So I've relocated the sensor. Now, what I had to do is, of course, that sensor would not go, in the gooseneck here. So I purchased a ACT sensor that would normally be, in a 5 liter, push rod motor. I drilled the gooseneck, the part after the throttle body here. There's a little area that you have some room. I drilled it and tapped it for, I think it's 3/8 pipe thread. Threaded that ACT sensor into that. And then, of course, I had to go through my box of hard shells to find one that will fit that sensor, and added the wires that was needed, to hook it into, the wiring harness. This way I'll know how much the air temperature goes up when it goes into boost. And also, at a later date, if I go with an intercooler, I'll know how much it lowered the air temperature. So I think it's a good thing to do from a tuning aspect. Now, just right after I did that first video, I did receive the supercharger. It is a Vortec V3, so it has its own oiling system. It does not tie into the engine oiling system, and it is a tuner kit for a 99 Mustang. I decided, to get the tuner kit, costs less, and your full kit, of course, would have new injectors, new fuel pump, a tune to put into the processor. Well, the tune's not going to work. It's not going to be compatible with the Thunderbird processor. And I've already changed the injectors, I've already changed the fuel pump. So all I want is just the hardware, to put the to put the supercharger on. Now, about a week ago, after I got the kit, I did a test fit on the car. I took the front dress off, put the mount on, temporarily put the supercharger on there. Mainly, I was looking to make sure that I had all the nuts and bolts that I was supposed to get. And I decided to do that so I would, predetermine any kind of clearance problems I might have. I already knew that I probably would have a clearance problem with the hood, and I did. So I made note of that. I've actually made the modification to the hood. I'll show that a little later. And the other thing was the radiator. The radiator I knew was probably going to be a problem, and it absolutely is a problem as far as clearance. And I will show you that. So we'll go over here and start taking it apart, and in detail I'll show you what's needed to start installing this supercharger. Okay, you can see here is where I relocated the ACT sensor right here. Okay, first thing we want to do is take the, the air intake off, the mass air, and the air box. So we'll do that right now. I've already, loosened up some of the clamps. There we go. And I'll unscrew the 3 nuts here that holds the box down to the fender. Okay, and by the way, if you've got one of these little, little parts boxes, works really nice. As you're taking stuff apart, you can put it in here, keeps everything organized. When you start putting everything back together, you don't have to be looking all over the floor, for your nuts and bolts. Nice little thing to have. Okay, next we want to go ahead and take the belt off. So you have the tensioner here, so you need a breaker bar or a ratchet with a 1/2-inch drive socket head on it. We'll loosen the tensioner and take the belt off. Okay, next we'll take the coil pack off and the bracket. The bracket has 2 bolts and 1 nut. Remove that. And we'll take the little wire harness off. Kind of put it to the side there. Okay, this top bolt stud that's on the tensioner, we'll remove that because that interferes with the bracket, and we'll replace it with another regular bolt that comes in the kit. If you didn't have that, of course you could just cut the little stud part off. That would be fine, and we really don't have to take the tensioner off. However, if this is the original tensioner, you got to figure that the spring has, has gotten weak over the years. It probably is a good idea to just go ahead and replace that. I do understand that some of the original equipment tensioners have a larger bell right here, and that actually interferes with the bracket. This one does not, so I'll only just remove that top bolt stud. And all of these bolts, they have different head sizes on them. They're either going to be 10 millimeter, 13 millimeter, 15 millimeter, or in some cases, some of them are 18 millimeter. So I'll get that off. We'll take this idler pulley off. That will go, but will be reused later, but for now, we just want to get that off. Okay, starting from the center of the engine and working my way to the right of the engine, this bolt here that goes in the alternator, that has to come out. You can see I've already loosened it. And we'll just take that out and put it aside. Okay, this bolt stud that's at the top of the chain cover, that has to come off. This one happens to have a very large hex head on it, 18 millimeter. The one you're working on, it might be a different size. Now this one will have to be replaced with a bolt that comes in the kit that does not have the stud on it, because that does interfere with the bracket that's going to go on here. My kit, however, does not have one, because the 99 birds, or the 99 Mustangs rather, have 10 millimeter bolts here, back here, and down here. The 88 and earlier Mustangs, along with the Thunderbird, uses 8 millimeter bolts. So therefore, I'll either have to replace this bolt with a regular non-studded head bolt, or on this one I'll likely just cut that stud off and reuse it. You have one that's on the other side. Again, this one has an 18 millimeter head on it. And if you had a 99 Mustang, again, this would be a 10 millimeter bolt, whereas this one is an 8 millimeter bolt. And then the next one down, which on mine has a different head on it, 13 millimeter head, same type of arrangement. It is a bolt stud. And again, this one's 8 millimeter. A 99 Mustang would have a 10 millimeter, a little bit larger diameter bolt. Okay, now if you had a Mustang, say 66 up Mustang, there would be a air conditioning bracket here. You would have these AC hoses would be right here, tubes, and that little bracket would be reused. It would sandwich between the supercharger bracket and the front cover. Now, the Thunderbird does not have a bracket there, even on the air-conditioned models. So therefore, you have to use little spacers between the between the front cover and the supercharger bracket. So be mindful of that. Again, this one doesn't have it. I think the 99 Mustang only has one. It uses it's sandwiched between that bottom bolt. However, there's not one on the top bolt. So on the 99 Mustang version, the spacer that you would add to the supercharger bracket would only be on that top one. Okay, here is the supercharger bracket, and the three holes that we're dealing with is this hole here, which will go right there, and this one, which is these two outer bolt holes on the cover. Now, because this is a Thunderbird or a 98 or earlier Mustang, all three of those holes would be filled with a 8 millimeter by 140 millimeter bolt. If you had a 99 Mustang, these two would be a 10 millimeter by 140 millimeter bolt. Now, of course, my kit only came with one 8 millimeter one because it, thought that it was a 99 Mustang. So I'll use that one, probably in this location. I looked through my box of bolts. I was able to find another one, a 8 by 110 or 140 millimeter. And I couldn't find another one. However, I did find a stud. This right here is about a 150 millimeter long, 8 millimeter diameter stud. And actually what this came out of was a V6, 3.8 liter V6 for the timing chain cover. It goes, you have 4 of them. Goes through the timing chain cover and through the water pump. 3 of them, they're pretty long, and then you have one extra long one. This one is this one right here. So in the final analysis, I may wind up having bolts in all locations, but for now, I'll just simply take this stud and I'll thread it into the lower hole under the alternator, and we'll start doing a test assembly of this bracket. And that's good enough. Next, from the kit, there's a 2 1/4 inch long steel spacer that will go right there. Then you have a bracket for a idler pulley that came with the kit, and we'll use the small hole there. We'll put that right on here. Again, we're just doing this temporarily, so I'm only using this really just to take up the space. I'm not worried about the pulley being on there. I'm also not worried about putting the stock idler pulley back on at this point. Now, I'll take the bracket and just, lay it right on that hole on the stud. And now I have to get my other 2 bolts. Okay, next I need to take those 2 long 8mm by 140mm bolts. Again, if you had a 99 Mustang, these would be 10mm by 140mm long. And they will go in, this location and this location. And because I don't have that air conditioning bracket to create a spacer, I will use the washer that comes in the kit. One will go in that location, and, the other washer will go right here, and then we'll bolt these 2 into the end holes on the timing chain cover. So let me get that lined up, and we'll get that lined up, and I got the the spacer on the back. Just got a couple threads on that. Then I'll introduce the second washer right here. Again, if you had that bracket, then that would go, between the chain cover and the supercharger bracket. So just a couple threads there, and I'll go ahead and put the nut there. Then I want to add 2 more bolts for alignment purposes. You have this bolt here, which is, I think it's 8mm, comes in the kit. And remember, you would have the original idler pulley would be right there, and this would sandwich it in there. Right now I'm just using it, only to line it up. And you have another bolt right here from the kit. Now I want to just, snug, those 2 long ones and the nut right here for now. Okay. Okay, that's good for now. I'll take 2 of the 3/8 bolts that came in the kit. I'll put one right here and one right here. And let me get the supercharger. And here's the supercharger, and you mount it on these cars actually backwards. And this is the orientation. And what you do is you just slide it right down so these holes right here line up, with these holes. Okay. Just put it right in here. There we go. And I'm just gonna, thread these, the 2 bolts, this one right here and the one down there. And we'll just snug up those 2 bolts right there. Let me get my wrench. Okay. Okay, now let's take the input tube and try to locate it. And as you can see, it normally goes right here. This goes there with the hose, and there is absolutely no way that's going to go in there. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the fan shroud off. It's 2 bolts. It's a bolt on each side, sets and clips on the bottom. Of course, I have to take the wire loose going to the motor, fan motor. We'll take that off and see if that helps us any at all. Okay, let's see if that made any difference. All right. Well, not really. All it did was give me a little bit of room for this little fitting here, which that goes to the bypass. And as you can see, the real problem is the radiator right here. Okay, so what to do? To me, there's only 2 solutions. It's either get a radiator that's lower than this one. You could use the Mustang radiator. The Mustang radiator of this vintage is a little bit shorter, and it's also wider. Now, being wider, that creates a problem. If you look over there, the end tank of the radiator is pretty much touching the battery box over there. And on this side, as far as where the bracket is, you only have about another inch to go. I think the end tanks, end to end, the radiator would probably fit between the frame rails, but the mounting part down there, on the bottom, that absolutely would have to be cut up. And my way of thinking, if you've got to cut that all up, and understand, if you're going to go with a Mustang radiator, you have to go with a Mustang fan shroud, and the lower hose has got to be changed because I believe the hose connection is actually a different size on the Mustang. So way I look at it, try to do the least amount of fabrication and the least amount of parts replacing as possible to get the job done. So I've already did some measuring, and I found to get this to work, to have that intake tube that comes with this, to be able to actually go on there, miss the hood when you close the hood, the radiator needs to be lowered and it needs to be moved forward. And by my measurements, the radiator really needs to be dropped about 1.5 inches, maybe 1.75 inches, and the radiator needs to go forward about 2 inches. So in other words, what I'm looking to do, this part of the radiator right here needs to be under this bulkhead about 1/2 inch here. There's a rolled piece of sheet metal right there, and this part needs to be right parallel with that rolled piece. So going down about 1.5 inches or so, going in about 2 inches, that's going to put the radiator further forward, get it out of the way, and the fan shroud, which is also going to stick out, I believe, by being lower, that will clear that tube, including that that hose connection on the bottom for the bypass. So the next thing that needs to be done, the sheet metal part that's underneath the radiator that has the support, that needs to be cut out with probably use a Sawzall or cut off wheel, and I need to do some fabrication down there, and that will be in part 3. I'll show you what I have done to take care of that clearance problem. The other clearance problem is right here. If you look at this, it's obvious this blower is sticking up a little bit higher than the alternator. The hood on a Bird is very low in this area. So let me show you what I wound up doing for this clearance problem. Okay, what I found is this area, this scroll area on the supercharger definitely sticks up too high and hits this reinforcement piece of the hood. So I, by eyeballing it, I looked under, kind of looking down as I'm closing the hood. You can only close the hood down. You still have about 1.5 inches before it's fully closed and it's actually hitting there. So I made a mark there. Took a cut-off wheel, cut this area out. I started right where the end of this little slot is in this area, and I went up about 4 inches and then cut it real close to the reinforcement piece that's flush with the hood here, and came over on this side and came in pretty close and dressed this all up. And then that cleared it, it just barely cleared it. But I'll show you some still shots that I took with some modeling clay to show you that it's still close, but it does miss. Okay, this area right here, you can kind of see where the modeling clay has touched it. It's very close there, but it does miss the skin of the hood, barely. However, as the scroll piece of the blower comes over here, this is where it, absolutely hits. So by cutting this out, it cleared that area, and then you think about the hose and everything that's got to go on it and the clamp. So this gives me some, pretty much a lot of wiggle room. So we're pretty far away there. You see little red marks here and under there. Those are made from a little bit of lipstick that I put on the modeling clay for the coil. I knew the coil pack was going to be another area that would cause a problem. And understand, if I make a bracket, to put this coil on, the coil, of course, will be off of the valve cover slightly. And, this is obvious that's going to be too close. So I'm going to cut this area out here, and that should not only clear the wires, you don't want it to just clear. After all, high voltage wires going to the spark plugs, you can have, a spark jump. So you want to not just barely clear, you want to clear by right much. I think as long as I cut it out right in here, it should clear it real good, and I will be able to mount my bracket and not even have to worry about the coil actually touching the valve cover. I might be able to raise it just a little bit. That should take care of that. Thank you very much for watching part 2 on installing a supercharger on this 96 Thunderbird. In the next part, I will be doing the fabrication that's needed to get this radiator lowered and repositioned. At that point, most of the fabrication will be done, and we will actually start installing the supercharger on the engine. Thanks again, and as always, good luck on your project.